Welcome to the Attorney Post, your source for inside baseball talk about the legal field with the top attorneys in the country. Here's your host, Justin West.
All right. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Attorney Post. I'm your host, Justin West, and today we're going to be discussing various facets of the law. I have with me Geoff Morris, and Geoff is a workers' compensation attorney in Riverside, California, also serving Costa Mesa and Covina, and we'll be talking with him here in just a minute. First, let's take a look over at his website. This is themorrislawgroup.com. You can see there's Geoff right there. Lots of great experience, really great success rate, lots of good badges, 10.0 superb rating with Avvo, etc. So this is who we're going to be talking to today, particularly about workers' compensation law and auto accidents. But first, as always, we are going to read from one of our sponsors. Appropriately, our first sponsor is injuryattorneyleads.com. Those of you who listen know this particular sponsor of ours. Injuryattorneyleads.com. If you are a personal injury attorney, you know that you can regularly spend a lot of money advertising, but most methods of advertising yield lackluster results. Oftentimes, you can pay between $100 and $500 just for a single lead and still wind up getting leads that are not qualified if you ever even get a hold of that lead at all. Oftentimes, you can burn through 5 to 10 leads just to get one serious prospective client on the phone. The solution is injuryattorneyleads.com. Injuryattorneyleads.com has people reaching out to them all across the country. They fill out a form, and that's where most other lead generation companies stop. But injuryattorneyleads.com is just getting started. They reach out to each and every person who fills out a form and re-verifies the information on the phone before live transferring qualified individuals directly to your firm. These are only people who have been in an accident and who want to speak with a lawyer about their case. You can be sure that these potential clients meet your criteria for a qualified lead, and close rates average 60% or higher. Set up a time to talk with a client generation specialist by visiting injuryattorneyleads.com and clicking on any of the buttons to schedule a time with a specialist. Again, that's injuryattorneyleads.com. All right, and I'm going to jump back over here, and I've got Geoff with me. How you doing today, Geoff?
Doing great.
Awesome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for taking the time. So Geoff runs the eponymous Morris Law Group. It bears his name. We just saw it a minute ago at themorrislawgroup.com. You can find a link to his website down below, of course, in the show notes as always. He obtained his law degree in '91 from the University of the Pacific and started practicing law that same year. He got started defending insurance companies and other larger companies. He was on the defendant side of injury suits. He actually became a partner with the law firm that had hired him in '96. And then in 2002, he started a plaintiffs side firm, and a decade later started the Morris Law Group, where he, of course, is currently practicing now. He's a SoCal native. He lives in Orange County. Again, he serves clients in Riverside, Costa Mesa, and Covina. He's married. He's got 2 boys and a 99% win rate with over 3,000 clients served and 30 years with a 10.0 rating on Avvo, as we saw a minute ago. So question number one I always like to ask Geoff is, what did I miss?
You covered it pretty well. I've had a lot of experience handling jury trials in a civil format, as well as in front of the Workers' Compensation Appeals Board. I'm a member of AVVO, which is the American Board of Trial Lawyers, which is the most prestigious trial lawyer group in the United States, which is an invitation-only group. Beyond workers' compensation and personal injury, throughout my career, I've done pretty much every type of law. For the last 10 years, especially, my focus has solely been on workers' compensation and personal injury, only representing those injured in accidents.
Okay. So with workers' compensation, I have understood, at least in certain jurisdictions, that there's kind of a tension point between going in for workers' comp versus going in for a lawsuit. I have clients that I've worked with in New York City, for instance, who say they don't do workers' comp at all, but they only do injury, and they focus on particularly like construction workers on a job site where there's a fall, and there's all sorts of regulations in New York about what they can do. How does the law for workers' compensation work, particularly out west in your neck of the woods there?
So in California, every employer is required to maintain workers' compensation coverage, either through insurance or going through a rigorous process of being self-insured. In California, it's a no-fault system, meaning that whether it's your fault or the employer's fault when you're injured, you're able to pursue a claim. It's administrative law. When you're mentioning about attorneys in New York only doing injury cases and not workers' compensation, if you're injured while working, your sole remedy is the workers' compensation system in California. I do both personal injury and workers' compensation because very often an injured person has two avenues to recover. In the instance where, for example, maybe you're a Federal Express driver, and while driving the FedEx truck, another vehicle rear-ends you, you'd have the option of pursuing a workers' compensation claim against Federal Express's workers' compensation coverage, and you'd also have the option of pursuing a civil claim in state court against the party that rear-ended you. Some firms will just focus on workers' compensation and refer out the civil injury claim to another lawyer or vice versa. I like to do both, depending on the case and the amount of insurance coverage and the type of injuries. The recovery can be greater. It might be better to pursue a workers' compensation claim. It might be better to pursue a personal injury claim. It might be beneficial to pursue both. There's a lot of technicalities in terms of credits the other systems get against one another. Technically, you're not supposed to get a double recovery, but in many cases, I'm able to obtain a double recovery for my clients that far exceeds what they could get in if they just pursued one avenue.
So I'm guessing that's one of the reasons it would make sense for somebody to work with an injury attorney, especially one as qualified as you. You understand the ins and outs, and you understand. You're kind of like a Swiss Army knife. You're a Swiss Army lawyer. You understand exactly what the right tool is for the right job, and you've got that available, whether it's pursuing the workers' comp or pursuing the personal injury route. So why, in general, does it make sense to hire an attorney if you've been injured? And what are the first steps somebody should do if they've been injured on the job?
Well, first off, everyone should obtain an attorney because the insurance company, they have their attorneys, and it's not a fair fight. The insurance company has their adjusters who are trained to handle these type of claims. And the insurance business model is to collect premiums and then figure out ways to pay the least amount of money possible on claims. And it's the very early stage of a claim, whether it's a work injury or an auto accident, that is super critical in terms of preserving evidence, which could mean photographs of the scene of an injury. It could mean receiving treatment and having your injuries documented so that an insurance company can attack either fault for the accident or the causation of your injuries.
Gotcha. Now, you actually started working on the defense side of personal injury. You did that for, it looks like about a decade or so before you jumped ship, so to say, and started working on the plaintiff side instead. What led you to become a plaintiff attorney, and what did you learn working on the defense side that you bring to the table when you're working for your clients currently?
You know, I did work for insurance companies for 10 years, and it just became very unsatisfying. You're just every day just concocting reasons to, quite frankly, screw injured persons out of money they're entitled to because of their injuries. It just became monotonous. While I did defense work on the side, I did do a few plaintiff cases, and I found that much more satisfying, recovering damages for injured persons as opposed to representing the insurance companies. What I learned working for insurance companies is invaluable. The process they go through, what they look at, and either to discredit your case, or the things they look at which props up the value of the case. And that's why it's critical you obtain any attorney that has experience, because they can set in place the things you need to prove your case, so the insurance company will make a fair offer.
Gotcha. So I guess what's one thing that you wish you would have known that you know now getting into this? What's one thing that you've learned along the way that you wish you would have known when you first got started?
For as being a lawyer?
Sure. Or, guidelines or things that you didn't realize when it comes to serving your clients, whether it's on the defense side or the plaintiff side?
That's a good question. I think as a young lawyer, you don't listen as well as you should. And I think with experience, just taking the time to listen to your clients, they've got some really good nuggets in their story that if you just take the time and pull the detail, listen to them, and then pull those details out, it'll serve you well to ensure that either the client gets the appropriate type of treatment they deserve, or to pursue key evidence in a case.
Gotcha. Well, I'm assuming you have to listen to your clients very well to have a 99% win rate. You got to be pretty judicious, I'm sure, in the cases that you take on as well. So let's shift feet just a little bit here. People like to know, how you've grown. Obviously, a little bit about what you've learned in the process, but success is a great teacher, but so is failure. 99% win rate means 1% failure. Nobody wins 100% of the time, at least if you've been playing long enough. So can you tell us, Geoff, about a time that you failed, and ideally something that it taught you in the process? Maybe it was something as simple as a clerical error that you thought was taken care of and wasn't taken care of, or somebody said one thing and you took them on face value without, following up or something like that. But tell us about a time that you had a failure in the process of practicing law, and what it taught you.
In terms of the 1% of case that does not result in a recovery, quite frankly, that's usually a case where the particular client's argument regarding fault isn't as strong. There should have been more research done on the front end regarding the client's version of liability in terms of talking to witnesses. And as you invest a lot of time into the case, you come to discover that the other side has a good argument on fault too. And our facts weren't as strong as they should have been. Quite frankly, usually the case that doesn't work out is one that my gut from the beginning tells me maybe I shouldn't take, but I kind of like the novelty of the issue and to see if I can win it. And a lot of them you do win, but occasionally, the thing about law is you've got an adversary and they're working their hardest to win their case too.
Yeah.
And when you're defense, you don't get to pick your cases like you do on the plaintiff's end. So I'll try to be pretty choosy, but occasionally I won't follow my gut. And those are probably the 1% that don't work out.
Gotcha. Well, it's one of the benefits of having an attorney represent you, though. For anybody listening, again, if you're in the Riverside area and you've been injured in workers' comp, automobile accident, et cetera, is having an attorney in your corner who knows what they're doing can greatly improve your chances of success. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm sure, Geoff, your firm, the Morris Law Group, like many others, probably offers a free consultation to make sure that people are taken care of. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
On every case. If my staff has a lot of experience with COVID right now, I'm always in the office. Before, I was at court engaged in deposition, and you'd have to make an appointment to meet with me. Now it's really easy to get a hold of me if I'm not busy doing a podcast like this. You'll get a consultation right away. And I want to do a consultation. I want to meet with the client. That's not something I want to delegate. I want to find out, what the accident was, how they got hurt. I want to ensure that the case is going to start off on the right foot. I want to manage expectations to make sure that the client knows the procedure, make sure we're on the same page, make sure that they understand they can always talk to me, they can always email me. And I find the case runs a lot smoother in that manner. And, I'll be honest with people too and tell them it's not a case I would take, but maybe someone else would take, and this is how to pitch it to another lawyer. Because we all handle these cases on a contingency, meaning that, we only get paid if we get a positive result. And sometimes I'll even tell people that they should handle it on their own, and I'll give them pointers on how to do it on their own. Because their injury might be a minor injury, they might in the initial consultation indicate that they're not interested in, there's work on both ends on these cases, and they're not interested in doing the work. They can't take off from work. So I'll lay out for them a negotiation strategy with the adjuster. Say, hey, come in and ask for this amount of money, and don't accept less than this.
That's awesome that you're willing to, even if you don't take them on as a client. So to look out for them and look out for their best interest. I know a lot of people would just say, go talk to someone else, see you later. But the fact that you're willing to listen to people and to give them advice makes sense, and is a good thing. One of our motto here at the Attorney Post is, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any rights. And so, of course, the first step anytime you have an issue in law is to talk to an attorney. Always talk to your attorney. Always figure out what your rights are. What your best step forward is. Sometimes it's litigation, sometimes it's not, but the person who can tell you that better than anyone else is going to be the attorney. So I think that's awesome. Well, let's put the foot back down on the other side then. You mentioned one of your failures and some of the things that you've learned, but everyone always loves to brag a little bit as well. So Geoff, tell us about a couple of cases that have just gone smashingly well. Some of your biggest wins. People love to hear a good victory story, a client who was really down and out, or somebody who was really suffering bad or had been turned down by other people and didn't think they were going to be able to get justice, and that you secured a life-changing win for.
I've had a couple. Most recently that pops to mind, I represented a young man who worked at a ski resort and in a fluke accident fell off of a chairlift and became a paraplegic. And the employer denied that workers' compensation claim. A defense is if an employee is engaged in horseplay, and the employer alleged horseplay. We took a lot of depositions to refute the employer's position, and ultimately at trial, a judge believed my client's version of the story, and we got a 7 figures verdict on that.
Wow. So, I mean, it's a terrible situation, but it'd be a far worse situation if you didn't have that financing behind you to he's going to need help the rest of his life for sure, to live and to function. And so knowing that you've got that cushion to survive on is obviously huge. Got another one?
I said, as I've done a lot of different types of cases, I have done my share of employment cases, and I represented a cheerleader against a professional sports team on a sexual harassment case. That had facts out of a TV drama that resulted in a 7 figures settlement on it.
Wow. So you do a lot more potentially than just injury, but it sounds like injury is still obviously your main go-to, your bread and butter there.
Right. I mean, when you're handling workers' compensation cases, these are all workplace events. So, in discussing people's workplace injuries, employment issues come up too. And
Gotcha,
I've
gotcha.
had my share of doing employment work. When I did defense work, I defended employers on employment cases too. So, employment cases, you have to even be more selective than on auto cases or workers' compensation cases. But if it's a case I can't handle, I've done so much areas of law that I can spot the issue and refer someone to a colleague that could handle them if it wasn't something I could handle.
Gotcha. A specialist. I just had another question I was going to ask you related to what we were just saying. I totally blanked on it. Shoot. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll pause here for just a second. We're going to jump over and read from our second sponsor. When I come back, I'm going to ask a couple more questions, including if you could change something about the law. This is the magic wand question I often ask. If you had a magic wand and you could change one thing about the law that affects you or that affects your clients, what would that be? So we'll do that here in just a minute. But first, we're going to jump over and read from our second sponsor. Obviously, first, we're going to look at your website again. This is the morrislawgroup.com. That's the morrislawgroup.com. Here is the button. And up here, you can click to get a free schedule a free consultation. You can also call 888-677-7882. That's 888-677-7882 if you are in the California area, particularly Riverside, in that general area, West Covina, Costa Mesa and Covina. In that area, you can reach out to Geoff and his law group. Our second sponsor today is Rocket SEO from hundreds of customers. And here is that video you guys have seen before. Are you a business owner who knows that being on page one of Google is important, but you're afraid to work with an SEO company because you know that SEO is expensive and oftentimes slow? Well, not anymore. Rocket SEO from hundreds of customers forces you to page one of Google safely and legally through the power of the news media. Rocket SEO utilizes national news media campaigns across a gamut of news sites that rank instantly inside of Google. You can boost your website's ranking in Google in 1 week or less with our simple system that leverages the power of major media companies and network affiliates of ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox, as well as all of the major local stations from the Boston Herald to the Sacramento Bee and all stops in between across the United States to put you on page one of Google in under a week, oftentimes 2 or 3 times on page one, and oftentimes for dozens of keywords. To learn more, visit hundredsofcustomers.com/rocket. That's hundredsofcustomers.com/rocket. All right, and we're back with Geoff again. All right, so Geoff, here's the fun question, and I may have a couple more for you to follow up. But again, if you could wave your magic wand, I talk to a lot of lawyers, and they oftentimes have varied opinions on things in the law that they found very, very frustrating, things that get in the way for their clients, things that have really, stopped them from getting more success than they could have for their clients, et cetera. So if you all of a sudden had a magic wand, you could wave it and change one thing about the law that affects you or that affects your clients, what would that thing be?
I think in the area of workers' compensation, there's a myth out there that injured workers are hitting the lottery when they get injured, and there's this myth that there's people faking injuries and receiving a cushy pension the rest of their life. In California, the reality is, in 2004, there were radical changes to the workers' compensation system that cut the payments to injured workers in half, and it hasn't been adjusted since. The medical care has been attacked. Workers' compensation was originally established as a bargain between employees and employers as a system that would control costs for the employers and provide medical care for injured workers and get them back to work. And the system's become politicized, and insurance companies have taken control of it, and employees are not receiving the type of medical care in a prompt manner, in a quality manner, to fix the type of injuries that need to be fixed. And when there are serious injuries, the compensation that one receives in workers' compensation is not something that's handed out by a jury or a judge, but it's administrative off of the table. And it's high time that the politicians in California take care of injured workers and readjust the system and swing the pendulum back in the favor of injured workers.
Gotcha. No, I think that makes a lot of sense.
And without a lawyer, you have no chance in the workers' compensation system.
I can imagine. I was a fool, and I got a ticket once when I was in high school for moving a street sign that was down, and the officer thought that I was going to run off with it. I was really just pulling it out of the way, but he's like, "No, you're clearly trying to steal it." And I went to court and I represented myself, and I lost. And I had to pay a fine and everything else. And that was I think it was my first real encounter with the law. I don't think I've actually shared that with their listeners before, but that's when I learned that representing yourself is generally it's a quixotic fool's errand. You're tilting at a windmill, and your chances of success are pretty low. So always work with an expert. So I remember the question I want to ask you, and it's a question that I've actually pondered myself sometimes. How many hours of work would you say go into one of your average cases? I'm sure that there's some cases that are just like way off the chart, just tons and tons of hours because there's so many facets. I'm sure there's a few that you're like, oh, this is an in and out case. So what do you think is your average number of hours you put into any particular case that you represent? And what do you think are the thresholds on either side? What's one of the easiest cases you had and one of the hardest or longest cases as well?
Well, I'm asked that question all the time by clients. How long is this going to take? Mm-hmm. And number one, a case won't resolve until your client their injury is resolved or is plateaued in some way. So, your typical injury, if you have injured your neck or your back or a knee or a shoulder, realistically, that injury isn't going to resolve in less than 90 days. You're usually looking at 4 to 5 months until you've seen doctors and had treatment and your injury's resolved. And after that point, if you get a case settled, that can take another 3 or 4 months to haggle and negotiate with the insurance company. Your typical case that you file a lawsuit on, it's going to, at a minimum, take an additional year of litigation. And your typical workers' compensation or personal injury case, the time that goes into it at a minimum, if you're adding up my time and my paralegal's time that's assigned to the case, at a minimum, you've got 100 hours into it.
Wow.
With all the telephone calls and all the work and all the appearances at court. There are occasions though where cases do get resolved in 3-4 months, but those are few. To get the result you want, you have to go through all the different steps of your case. I get all the time asked by clients, just pick up the phone and get me this money. And I'm like, the insurance company, it's their business to be stubborn and not pay on claims. So there's certain steps you need to go through to keep the insurance companies honest to get a fair settlement out of them. And if you can't get the fair settlement, then you have to file your lawsuit and then go through those steps.
Right. Gotcha. All right. Well, Geoff, this has been a good good conversation. I always say good call. It still feels like a phone call these days, this whole Zoom thing. I'm still getting used to it. It's been years. I'm still getting used to it. I've really enjoyed our time talking. I feel like I've learned a little bit today too. And I always like to learn in these calls. It's one of the reasons I have these conversations. It helps me to learn the law as well. I always like to give you the final word. Is there any last words or parting wisdom that you'd like to leave with our listeners, particularly, of course, if they're in your neck of the woods and in need of an attorney?
You brought it up before, why should you hire a lawyer? At a minimum, everyone should at least speak to a lawyer to understand your rights, as you mentioned. Um, I think I'm, obviously being a lawyer, I think it's important to obtain a lawyer. And the most important reason is, and I sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but it's the very front end of the case, establishing your evidence. In most cases in California, people do not have medical insurance. And the longer you wait to have your injury seen by a doctor, the insurance company will make an argument that either your injury wasn't caused by the accident, or the longer you wait, the more they'll argue that the injury is not as severe as you're claiming. And I think that's something I can't stress enough. And I have too many people that call me a month after an incident. And in some cases, it's been too much time. And it's a case I can't take because I know the insurance company will dig their heels in and deny the claim. But talk to a lawyer and find out. There's always ways to get around it too. It's not the end of your case.
There you go. Always seek legal representation. Again, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. My name is Justin West, and you've been listening to The Attorney Post. I've been talking today with a workers' compensation injury attorney in Riverside, California by the name of Geoff Morris. He runs the morrislawgroup.com that bears his name. You can find him online again at themorrislawgroup.com. Here's his website over here. As always, we will have a link in the show notes below to his website if you are in the Riverside area, or again, also Costa Mesa or Covina. I can't say those for whatever. I keep putting that hard C in there. But if you're in that area, if you've been injured in an accident on the job or any other kind of injury, if you've suffered a wrong from an employer, or of course, if you've been in an automobile accident, highly recommend working with Geoff and his law group, themorrislawgroup.com. You can reach them online at 888-677-7882. And again, we'll have links to his information down below in the show notes. Again, this is Justin West with The Attorney Post. I want to thank Geoff for being with us today. As always, if you guys are enjoying this podcast, feel free to give us a like down below. If you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to leave a comment. You can also, as always, find us on all of your major podcast channels, including, but not limited to, Apple, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and podcast.com. Until next time, as always, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any, so pick up the phone and call that attorney. Bye-bye.